Picture this: a routine congressional hearing, fluorescent lights humming overhead, maybe a dozen people scattered across uncomfortable chairs, C-SPAN cameras rolling lazily in the back. This was supposed to be background noise, just another economic equity meeting that nobody would remember by dinner time. But then Ivanka Trump walked in. She hadn't been seen on Capitol Hill in over a year. No official title now, no presidential advisor pin on her lapel, but still carrying that familiar mix of polished charm and steel that made every head turn. Across the table sat Representative Jasmine Crockett from Dallas, hair pulled back sharp, navy blazer, red pin at her lapel. Not flashy, not loud, just ready. What you're about to hear is how 6 seconds of silence and a single sentence turned this forgettable hearing into a masterclass in power. And trust me, nobody saw it coming. Jasmine came prepared. She had highlighters tucked in her binder, post-its marking every question. When her name was called, she didn't waste a second. Her voice was calm but firm as she zeroed in on grant dispersal rates in rural counties. Why fewer than 8% of infrastructure bill recipients were people of color. She mentioned contractors in Kansas and Mississippi denied access to capital despite meeting every federal requirement. Some panelists nodded politely. Some didn't. But one person didn't nod at all. Ivanka, seated at the end of the table, adjusted her microphone and smiled faintly when Jasmine finished. There was a pause, and then she leaned forward, her tone light but unmistakably condescending. "I think we all appreciate passion in this space," she began, "though frankly, real wealth creation usually comes from a different kind of resume. Corporate experience, deal-making, that sort of thing." She smiled again. It wasn't quite dismissive, but it was close. The jab had landed. A few heads turned toward Jasmine. One staffer put down his pen. The hearing hadn't been tense before, but now it had a pulse. And that's when something extraordinary happened. Jasmine blinked. She glanced down at her binder, then back up at Ivanka, but she didn't speak. Not yet. She just paused. 6 full seconds. It's strange how long that feels when cameras are rolling and the room is watching. She didn't fidget. She didn't look angry. She just waited, letting the air stretch so thin you could feel it in your chest. Then came her voice, measured and even. It's funny, because that resume has taught me how to fight for people who never got invited into rooms like this. And now I'm not just in the room, I'm leading it. No theatrics, no raised volume. Just clarity, like she'd been waiting for someone to say something like that her whole career. You could almost hear someone swallow. That's how quiet it was after Jasmine's reply. There was this tiny gap in time, half a second maybe, where no one moved. Just that stillness that happens when something lands harder than expected. Ivanka didn't react immediately. She pressed her lips together and looked down at her papers like she was trying to find her next note. But the smirk that had lived in the corner of her mouth all morning was gone. Representative Lisa Wexler from Utah leaned to her aide and whispered something. Across the room, a younger congressman mouthed "damn," without even realizing it. That was the moment people understood this wasn't going to be just another hearing. But what made Ivanka's comments sting wasn't just the words. It was how they'd been delivered. Smooth, smiling like an afterthought, like she was stating something obvious. And that's what made it cut deeper. It wasn't an attack. It was a dismissal. Jasmine had heard it before. Years ago, when she first ran for office, she was told she didn't look like someone who could represent her district. When she applied for a clerkship after law school, a judge said her resume showed community spirit, but lacked strategic depth. Before that, when she was tutoring students in college just to cover food and rent, a parent once asked if she was the assistant instead of the tutor. So when Ivanka said what she said, Jasmine didn't hear something new. She heard something old, dressed up in new clothes. And that's what made her pause. She didn't lash out. She didn't make it personal. She let it sit there, let it breathe, then hit back with something stronger than sarcasm. Reality. Outside the chamber, in a hallway usually reserved for staff huddles and coffee runs, a young black intern named Michelle stared at her phone. She'd just watched the clip for the 3rd time. She did not just say that, she whispered, grinning. "Who?" her friend asked. "Crockett. She just roasted Ivanka." Wait, watch this. She turned her phone around. 6 seconds of silence, and then boom. I'm leading it. Man. Right then, in real time, that little hallway became the first of hundreds of places where people started passing the clip around like candy. Inside the hearing room, Jasmine didn't seem fazed. She was already flipping through her binder, preparing for the next line of questioning. Her composure wasn't new. It was built, layered from years of being underestimated, overlooked, and talked down to, and still showing up. Ivanka sat straighter now. Her next answer came out more polished. But the glow had dulled. The balance in the room had shifted, and she knew it. You can't really recover from being publicly corrected with that much grace, especially when you started it. But Crockett's moment wasn't done echoing. It had just left the room and entered the world. Within 2 minutes, the clip was up on social media. No caption yet, but someone in the control room had sensed it. This wasn't just a moment. It was a kind of clip that defines character. A Brooklyn activist reposted it with the words, "This is what grace under fire looks like." A DC-based black law student wrote, "You could teach a whole course on how to carry yourself with power and use this clip on the first day." Even a conservative commentator not known for praise tweeted, "Don't agree with her politics, but that was ice cold. Respect." The hashtag started climbing. 6-second silence. Crockett clapped back. Even Jasmine's own communications director, sitting near the back, couldn't help but smirk. She knew how these things snowball. But here's the thing. Crockett wasn't aiming for viral. She wasn't performing. She was responding. Her words weren't crafted for applause. They were the result of years of building armor and knowing exactly when to take it off. People had seen rehearsed outrage before. They'd seen grandstanding, but they hadn't seen this. Grace with an edge sharp enough to slice through a room full of suits and ties. By early afternoon, the clip had left Capitol Hill and spread like spilled ink. Local reporters started calling it the 6-second silence. But what made this different was who was sharing it, not just journalists or political junkies. It was a hairstylist in Little Rock who posted it between clients, the teacher in Oakland who played it on loop during her lunch break, the Uber driver in Tallahassee who listened to it twice, then pulled over to send it to his sister. "I'm not just in the room, I'm leading it." That one line started appearing everywhere. Instagram captions, TikTok videos, Twitter bios. People were quoting it in group chats. Even accounts that rarely touched politics shared the video. Why? Because it wasn't about politics. It was about power and restraint and the kind of confidence that doesn't have to yell to be heard. On MSNBC, a panel replayed the exchange in slow motion. The host turned to her guest and asked, "When's the last time you saw someone make a statement that clean, that fast, and that elegant?" They all paused. Then a historian leaned in. What she did was create a moment that makes people remember why character matters in politics. It wasn't clapback. It was a masterclass. Back in Dallas, Crockett's team scrambled not to spin the story, but to keep up with it. Her inbox was overflowing. Even her mom called just to say, "I saw your little moment on TV. You were calm, baby. Calm like a storm." Jasmine didn't respond right away. She just smiled and returned to reading the hearing transcripts. She had more to say, and her next round of questions was coming. But what people didn't know was that this moment wasn't built overnight. Long before the marble halls and congressional microphones, Jasmine Crockett spent most of her days in county courtrooms. Low ceilings, stained carpets, and clocks that always ran 5 minutes slow. That was her first arena. She hadn't grown up imagining politics. Her world was shaped by watching neighbors get evicted with nowhere to go, seeing her aunt fight for disability benefits, reading legal notices tacked to front doors in South Dallas, like eviction was just another Tuesday thing. When she got to law school, it wasn't dreams of power that pushed her. It was frustration. She'd seen what happened when people couldn't afford a decent lawyer, so she became one. She worked public defense out in an office smaller than most kitchens, taking 6 or 7 cases a day, walking to court already knowing most of her clients wouldn't win. Not because they were guilty, but because the system didn't bend easily for people who couldn't afford clean records or second chances. There was one morning she never forgot. Early summer heat, already crawling up the building by 9 a.m. Her client was a 19-year-old caught with a dime bag of weed and a busted taillight. No priors, no weapon, just bad timing and bad luck. The prosecutor wanted jail time. Jasmine pushed back. She stood there in flat shoes, loose ponytail, folders under her arm, and made her case. Not a dramatic speech, no tears, just the truth. This kid didn't need punishment. He needed a job, stability, options. The judge listened, then for once ruled in their favor. The kid didn't even know what to say. He just stared at her and whispered, "That's it?" Jasmine nodded. "Yeah, that's it." Moments like that didn't go viral. No cameras, no headlines. But they stacked up, case after case, defense after defense. That's how she built her rhythm, learning to speak when it mattered and to wait when silence could speak louder. It was during those years she learned the power of timing. Judges would interrupt. Prosecutors would condescend. Even bailiffs would sometimes ignore her, asking where the real attorney was. She never snapped. She just built armor. Every smirk, every young lady, every eye roll became bricks. By the time she launched her campaign for state rep, people called her too direct, too loud, too bold. She smiled and kept knocking on doors. One afternoon, standing outside a laundromat, a woman paused and asked, "What makes you think you can fix any of this?" Jasmine didn't flinch. She looked the woman in the eye and said, "I don't think I can fix it all, but I can fight like hell trying." The woman took a flyer and told 3 other people waiting for their dryers. That's how it started. Now in Washington, Jasmine wore the same focus she had in those courtrooms. Different room, same fight. That's what made her calm during the hearing. When you spent years listening to people question your credentials, a microphone and a smirk from Ivanka Trump doesn't shake you. You've already been sharpened. And that 6-second pause? It wasn't for show. It was instinct. The same instinct she built waiting for a judge to finish scribbling notes, for a cop to stop interrupting her cross-examination, for a jury to look her client in the eye. That moment in the hearing wasn't performance. It was a culmination. People online were calling her the voice of now. But Jasmine knew she wasn't a moment. She was a product of years of moments stacking, building, waiting, and that's why she didn't celebrate. She just turned the page in her binder and moved on to the next point. The contrast between the 2 women wasn't just background, it was rhythm. Jasmine answered questions with context and specificity. Ivanka spoke in polished broad strokes, sometimes circling around points without landing them. Her voice was soft, controlled, but next to Jasmine's grounded clarity, it started to feel less convincing, like a rehearsed pitch in a room that needed real answers. During a break, reporters gathered in clusters near the back. One aide for a Republican senator muttered, "I thought Ivanka was supposed to own this thing." Another replied, "She didn't see Crockett coming." And maybe that was a problem. Ivanka had underestimated what lived beneath Jasmine's calm. She'd assumed her own resume would naturally outshine someone who'd spent years in public defense. But she forgot something critical. The kind of experience you can't buy. Jasmine had been forged in tension, in rooms where no one clapped when she spoke, where her voice had carried through interruptions and sideways glances, where her intelligence wasn't assumed. It had to be proven over and over again. Every question Jasmine asked was targeted, informed, rooted in real struggle. She didn't quote theories. She quoted stories. She knew the names of contractors in Jackson who hadn't received federal funding. She mentioned a woman in Tulsa who lost her storefront after a grant was delayed. These weren't numbers on a page. These were lives she touched, faces she remembered. One comment online read, "Ivanka's talking about policy like it's a Pinterest board. Jasmine's talking like she's been carrying people through the cracks." By the second round of questioning, something had cracked open. Lawmakers who earlier glanced at their watches now leaned forward. Even across the aisle, attention had shifted. Representative Gordon Haskell, a moderate from Ohio, looked over and asked, "Congresswoman Crockett, do you mind if I get your take on this?" He was supposed to direct his question to the panelists, but he didn't. Jasmine lifted her pen, uncapped it, and began to answer, not with slogans, but specifics. She talked about community banking access, the difference between loan eligibility and approval. She mentioned recent data from Cincinnati, even referenced testimony she'd read 2 years ago. And that's when people really started listening. What she said wasn't flashy, but it had weight. The kind of weight that comes from actually doing the work, not just reading headlines. Representative Leanne Moretti whispered to her aide, then turned to her mic. I'd also like to echo what Congresswoman Crockett mentioned earlier. We got to be looking at access and timing when it comes to these grants. That was new. In just under 2 hours, Jasmine had gone from one of several committee voices to the anchor in the room. No dramatics, no raised fists, just intelligence paired with clarity and the kind of earned authority you don't often see in a room filled with pre-written speeches. When the final question came, it was directed to the entire panel, but it was Jasmine who answered first. Her voice didn't waver. Her tone didn't rise. She gave a clear, thoughtful summary that tied the discussion together and recentered the issue on real people. People who didn't care about panel credentials or titles. People who just wanted access, stability, and fairness. By the time she finished, even some skeptics had leaned back, quiet, not because they agreed with her politics, but because they'd seen something rare. The hearing ended the way most do, with half-hearted claps and papers rustling. But as Jasmine stepped into the hallway, her phone buzzed. A DM from a staffer for Representative Dale Langston, a Republican from Arizona who rarely crossed party lines. The message was simple. That was one of the cleanest takedowns I've ever seen. Don't let up. If you ever want to talk numbers, I've got some data I think you'd care about. Jasmine smiled. Not big, just enough. Because that's what happens when someone brings something unfiltered to the table. The room doesn't just listen. It changes. And sometimes, if you're patient enough, if you built your armor strong enough, 6 seconds of silence can say more than a lifetime of speeches ever could. That moment wasn't just about Jasmine Crockett versus Ivanka Trump. It was about every person who's ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told they didn't belong in the room. And it was proof that sometimes the most powerful response isn't what you say. It's how long you wait before you say it.